The first time Princess Surlith of the House of Dawn saw the human cry. The palace alarms were still singing. The halls still smelled of coolant and burned metal. An imperial pride was bleeding out beneath the broken glass of the Eastern Observatory. She had gone there hunting for survivors, still wrapped in ceremonial silver. And through the torn doorway, she found Captain Adrian Vale of the Terran Envoy kneeling beside a dead communications clerk. One gloved hand pressed over the young woman's ruined chest, as if pressure alone might bully death into retreat. His shoulders were shaking, bright human tears falling soundlessly onto blood and crystal. Surelith stopped at once, not because she pitied him, but because the sight offended everything she had been taught about strength. Among her people, grief was folded inward until it cut clean and invisible. Rulers and warriors did not weep where others could witness it, yet the human made no effort to hide. He mourned like a storm breaking open, fierce and honest. And when he finally looked up and saw her, he did not wipe his face in shame. He only inhaled once, steadying himself, and said, "She died keeping your emergency channels open. She saved a wing of children in the nursery tier." Then he lowered his eyes again and added, "She should be remembered by name, not numbers." Minutes later, he was on his feet organizing rescue teams before the next bulkhead failure could bury the living with the dead. Giving orders to her officers, Surelith followed him through smoke and failing lights, watched him carry the injured, watched him speak gently to the panicked. And what unsettled her most was that the crying had changed nothing. He had not become smaller. If anything, he seemed heavier now, anchored by grief rather than drowned beneath it. That was the first crack in the princess's idea of weakness. The attack on the observatory became the first strike in what history would later call the Hollow Week. 7 days of sabotage, orbital raids, and internal betrayal. The Vare Combine had not come to conquer Surelith's empire in open war. They had come to humiliate it into surrender. Fuel depots vanished. Shield nodes failed. Noble houses blamed one another while border fleets burned. And all through that collapse, Adrian moved like an inconvenient truth with boots on. He slept in fragments, ate whatever ration bar he could open one-handed, and spent his waking hours stitching the palace and the fleet into something that could still fight. Surelith remained near him more often than protocol approved. First to monitor the foreign officer who had cried over one clerk. Then because she began to understand that the humans saw the shape of the disaster faster than the courtiers did. He noticed altered manifests, corrupted security codes, officers speaking in excuses instead of plans. And when he spoke of the dead, he always used names where he could find them. Each time someone whispered that the human was too emotional for command, Surelith remembered his face in the shattered observatory and said nothing. Then, on the 5th night, with evacuation ships lining the dusk side of the capital, the High Council gathered to decide which districts to abandon. They argued in cool tones about acceptable loss. And when Adrian demanded more transports for the labor wards beneath the southern docks, one counselor laughed and said the human attachment to every casualty was proof Terrans lacked the discipline required for Imperial command. Some hearts stay cold, so they never have to admit what their choices cost. Another called his grief performative. Another murmured that species who cried in public were born to follow. The room turned toward Surelith, expecting the princess to put the emotional animal back in line. Instead, she rose slowly and let silence stretch until it hurt. "I saw the human cry once," she said. And every head turned because courts love confession right up until confession becomes a weapon. "I saw him kneel beside one of our dead while this empire was still deciding whether to counter. I saw him mourn before he moved. And then I saw him rise and save more of my people in 1 hour than some bloodied houses have protected in generations." Her voice hardened. "You mistake the absence of visible grief for strength because it flatters you. You mistake distance for discipline because it excuses you. The human feels the cost, and because he feels it, he does not waste lives carelessly to preserve his pride. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of honor." The chamber froze. The counselor who had laughed tried to recover with a bow and a technical objection. Adrian cut him down with 3 logistical facts and a casualty projection that made half the room pale. Hearing the steel in his tired voice, Surelith understood at last why the tears mattered. because only the truly dangerous can afford to care that much and still continue. A ruler numb to suffering could order sacrifice easily, but a commander who felt every death and still walked into the fire would move mountains before spending lives cheaply. A heart that feels everything and still keeps fighting is far more terrifying than one that feels nothing. The transports flew that night, not enough for everyone, but enough to prove that policy could still bend before conscience if someone in power possessed a spine. Adrian coordinated launch corridors while Surlith took command of the defense batteries herself. Together, they turned retreat into resistance, and resistance into a wound the Vare could not exploit. By dawn, the southern wards were emptied. By noon, the traitor network inside the palace was exposed. And by the end of the 7th day, the Combine withdrew from orbit with 3 cruisers burning and their humiliation campaign. Broken on the simple fact that the Empire had finally stopped confusing emotional distance with superiority years later. When Surlith sat on the Sun Throne as Empress and cadets asked why the Terran captain's statue stood in the Hall of Victories with no weapon in its hands. Only a data slate and a medic's band wrapped around one wrist. She would answer the same way every time, because he taught us that mercy is not softness. Grief is not surrender, and tears do not make a warrior lesser. They remind him what he is fighting not to lose. She would always end with the same line. The alien princess saw the human cry once and never spoke of weakness again.